from everybody that's sitting here. I call on your ancestors today to come down and witness this pivotal time in our journey. It's bringing the past, the present, and the future together, and we need ancestors to be with us and guide us through this time. If we can all just open ourselves up and just for a moment have a thought about who we are and who our ancestors are, and bring them, invite them down respectfully. We can feel when ancestors are with us, and we can feel the space change. The space becomes filled with their aura, with their energy. And it's their energy that's gone back for thousands of years. So we invite your ancestors respectfully, please, to come and stand with us here and guide us in the future with this journey that we're on right now in the process of decolonizing a space and systems to allow us to achieve the rightful authority or equity that is connected to our creation and our creation beings, so that we move ahead on the right path. As the title of the session is Songlines from Songlines, because the songlines are under there, and this is what we're starting with. We're starting with an Indigenous perspective straight up. At the end of this session, then I'll close down and thank the ancestors and let them go. And I hope that you all feel this as well, and that we start to realize that we are not alone. We have a lot of power and a lot of strength. We can draw on it through processes like Dadiri. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for opening that. I just want to, before I start talking, acknowledge that I too am on Wadamadigal land here on Darug country, and I evoke their presence here in the space, as well as acknowledge and honour the ancestors that are here with me and informing this process. Thank you for doing that, Uncle. We will begin the session by talking about this concept. I'm sorry I can't put it into a full view. I've seemed to have downloaded it in a funny kind of format, but you can see my screen. But we'll start the session by this concept of throwing the stone into the water, which we've used as a metaphor to understand the research problem. And we really want to evoke the centrality and the importance of grounding our discussions and the way that we move forward in these conversations in honouring our practices as Indigenous people, and really honouring and looking at the method and institutions for working with knowledge that have long existed and that are still available to us. So the metaphor of throwing the rock into the water or the stone into the water is about reflecting and looking at the layers of the ripple effect of that stone. What happens when you put a stone in water is that you begin to see ripples. And this speaks to the notion of Dadiri, a really important context that we want to introduce into the onset of this space. We started to, when we first got asked to do this presentation, Uncle Wilo and I sort of went through this really kind of Western process of being very kind of theoretical, and we started to talk to what a framework might look like and how do we actually represent that diagrammatically, and how do we unpack and deconstruct all of the layers of this problem, this research problem of decolonizing the university. And we wrote up a paper together and I sent it to him and he sent stuff back, and then we sort of slept on it and woke up the next day and he sort of said, no, this is we can't do it this way. This is incorrect. So the point of me telling you that process was that we had to honour that calling, and we had to honour the change of that process, and really sit and reflect to really think about what it is that we're trying to do here, which is not, it's not a process that necessarily sits within the institution itself as well. Our ancestors had really sort of sophisticated systems, and there were systems and institutions and ways for organising society and people in a very in a relational ontology, which centred and really honoured relationships and the spiritual sacredness of kinship and community. So the notion of conflict was something that was really well embedded within that process and within the structures that were built within that context. Conflict resolution and models for conflict resolution, Indigenous models for conflict resolution, were well established and are well established within Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and many other First Nations communities and places worldwide. So we really wanted to look at the models, the Indigenous models of conflict resolution and conflict mapping, to help us unpack and understand what the first step in this process might entail, what it is that we need to understand at a deeper level. So conflict within an Indigenous context is a blessing. It can be seen as a blessing, and it signals the growth and development of the broader community. It should not be nurtured, rather instead it should be listened to, and proper steps should be taken to address the spirit that is behind the conflict. Within an Indigenous setting, conflict was not demonised. Instead, it was understood that the conflict was natural and it was inevitable. And so it was a vessel through which the complexities of our human experience can be fully expressed to help us transcend, evolve and grow as humans experiencing and interacting in the world and with institutions together. So what this has meant traditionally has been this need for a constant balancing, and the way that we achieved this was through ritual. And ritual was the vehicle or the vessel through which we could acknowledge the spiritual nature of relationships. So I just wanted to kind of open that context to really form the foundation that needs to be the way in which we approach this question. Because a big part of it is understanding the diagnosis. So the first step of conflict mapping or conflict resolution is diagnosis. How do we understand, identify or assess what the core problem is, or what the elements of that problem entail? And it's really important to contextualize the setting or the environment in which we're sort of positioning this conflict. The University of Sydney, or more broadly speaking, the sector of higher education. And realising that this conflict is multidimensional, it's multi-layered. In fact, part of the problem could be that it could be in the diagnosis of the problem itself, and that there are it's a conflict that entails multiple conflicts. So part of the resolution needs to be a two-way process, and that there are two bodies of work or two projects that are entailed in this process. One of decolonial practice and one of indigenization. And really what I want to sort of say about this is about the need to delineate between the two bodies of work that are required or that are entailed in this process. One is about disrupting. And there's
Kaiya, can you just unshare that thing and I'll share my screen, Bum?
Oh, okay.
With the PowerPoint, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. That would be good. Can you do that from your end now?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And
Can you go down?
Yes. To the conflict, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
So I just want to spend a moment and take this as an opportunity to actually talk about the University of Sydney as a specific context. Yeah, just that one. Yeah. Many of you would be well aware that many First Nations people, as well as others, non-Indigenous, come into this space. But in this context, I'm talking about First Nations people. First Nations people come into this space and they continue to be exploited, disregarded, discarded, harmed, and incur racial injury. Because we understand, you know, one of the fundamental premises of this problem that we need to understand is that it, you know, why decolonize the university? Because it's a colonized space and it continues to be. I think Alfred Tyeke is the person who says it, but you know, there is no post-colonial moment. We are still undergoing a process of colonization in this country as well as many other places in the world. So we're actually not at a point where we can have conversations around decolonization. Although it is a rhetoric that is here and has presented itself, and it's something that, oh, sorry, John. Is that a bit better? I'll speak up a bit louder.
It's not you, sis. Someone's mic was on. It was banging. I couldn't hear, eh?
Oh, okay. If you could all turn your mics off, that would be great. Thanks. So to go back, understanding the context in which we're speaking to, it's an inherently violent institution because of some of the historical issues that haven't yet to be addressed. So we need to understand and distinguish between the work that needs to, the work that is entailed as part of this process as being two separate processes. One is about disrupting, one is about dismantling. One is grounded in anti-colonial work that is often sort of rooted in justice research and transformative kind of action. And it focuses on producing knowledge that can dismantle the hegemonic colonial center. But it is work that essentially entails a focus on the colonial center. On the other side of that, and just to go back to that quickly, that is where I largely see the work of non-Indigenous engagement being positioned and situated, because it, as I said, there is a really kind of unbalanced, there is not equity in knowledge when we come into this space, and it's a space that is not afforded safety around to certain people. And that's why it was important that we open space with ceremony, because we understand that and acknowledge that as part of the process right from the outset all the way through. And we continue and carry that through our discourse, through our pedagogy, and through our language and the way that we disrupt processes and the way that we operate within the institution. So the other part of the, you know, the project is indigenizing or indigenization. This is also about deconstructing, but it's also about reorienting the order of inquiry. And it seeks to reconstruct by completely removing the colonial center as its focus, as one aspect of that work. Not the entire aspect, but one aspect of that work is about Indigenous to Indigenous exchange, what that might look like. Instead, it privileges cultural, Indigenous ontology and epistemology that is land-based, and it redirects our focus of inquiry into transformative and healing practices. So as it responds to the conflict that continues to occur within this space, that is the racial injury that occurs when First Nations people enter this institution, or any institution for that matter, within a colonial context. So yeah, it's a really kind of exciting, it can be an exciting and a very nourishing and transformative space to enter into if there are the correct parameters in place and protocols for engagement that have been established. So just to go back to that throwing the rock in the water metaphor, we can't begin to disrupt or reconstruct something unless we understand what is going on. We can't do that without observation and deep reflection of yourself and where you're positioned within those two bodies of work. And really understanding the delineations between deconstructing and reconstructing to help us better contextualize and frame the issues and our processes for critical analysis of the problem or the research problem. And it's really important that our interpretive frames are situated or positioned within these two different, ontological paradigms, really. I'm just gonna ask you to sort of go down, Uncle. So actions to move forward. Part of it is about the disruption. We really need to think about the disparity of equity between Indigenous knowledges and Western knowledges and the protection of those fields. Did you want to say, can I invite you to say something more to that, Uncle? Because we had a really good yarn about this, and I think it would be a nice entryway into talking about the action steps moving forward. You're muted, PS.
So my position on this is looking at it, and what I've learned from my time within this sort of tertiary level and higher education space is that we, as we come into this space, don't even have essential skills of navigating the space as Indigenous people. Indigenous people come in with Indigenous knowledges and there's no guideline on, or there's no truth-telling about what happens to those knowledges they bring into the institution as staff or as students. People aren't clear that if they start talking about something which they don't own, that they share custodianship of that knowledge, that they could be giving that copyright to the university. So there's lots of things that have to be navigated, and navigating that space, the hierarchy of levels of staff that have the power within universities is hard to navigate. You have lecturers, you have doctors, you have professors. Even though we have Indigenous ones, they're still very hard to navigate because there's a war going on with Indigenous people in institutions. There's a paper war that keeps our people at the top so busy that they haven't the time to practice Indigenous ways of engaging other people. Now, the whole basis of kinships and that is about sharing and caring. And I'm sure you're familiar with Kevin Gilbert, who said that our identity of Aboriginality is really the sharing and caring that happens in practice, because it's an innate way of being and doing. The space that we're talking about is that if this innate thing of sharing and caring happens, and we come into a space where there's knowledges that are a part of it, gaining knowledge, interpreting knowledge, building Indigenous knowledges, because what we're doing now is creating pathways off our old songlines. Yet, these pathways are starting to have Western laws, Western protocols, Western ways, and we're starting to lose ownership of these knowledges. as they start to get interpreted for the time that we live in. How we do that and how we protect those who are the custodians and caretakers at the university. What's our caretaker role when we work in a university? What does that look like when we say that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are caretakers? What's our role as custodian? So when we start to look at the two different populations or the institute's values and ways of being, then our ways of being, then we can start to understand the conflict. We can diagnose the conflict. We can map the conflict. We can see what the pillars are within the conflict. We can look at what the triggers are, when stalemates happen, the patterns and themes of the conflicts, and we can look at the different models that are in conflict resolution that address it. Is this conflict based on trust? Conflict based on oppression? And start to situate these conflicts. It's up to the white people or the non-Indigenous people to start to look at what the problem is on their side and figure it out, and us Black people, Indigenous people, to start looking at what the problem is on our side and start figuring it out. What's our role in all of this that's happening at the moment? And we were talking about this. A good way to start is for people to go off and reflect on what's happening. And if we're taking a two-way approach, the non-Indigenous people start to take notes about this, start to deconstruct what the situation is at the moment, and start to identify key pillars that they see, and we identify what key pillars that we see, and then we bring the non-Indigenous and the Indigenous together and start to cross-reference, see where the themes and patterns are, start looking at these themes and patterns and identifying the type of conflict that is happening. Conflict mapping, conflict resolution is a very good subject for Indigenous people because we can understand how conflict resolution happens globally, but we can also indigenize this process as well by putting in our protocols and the ways that we deal with it, reflecting it, and that humane way that we say works. But, you know, not saying that our methods for conflict resolution would be today, because there's corporal punishment, there's, you know, physical punishment that happens in the old days. We don't want to do that nowadays. And that should give us a good understanding of what the conflict is. And it gives you an understanding of how people see their role, not their personal role, but the role as non-Indigenous people and role as Indigenous people. What it depends on is honesty. It depends on truth. And sometimes it's really hard for us to sort of acknowledge that, you know, we're making mistakes. We are in a competitive and we are in a corporate situation where it's based on individualism. And we're talking about a sociocentric society versus an egocentric society. We're forced to compete with one another, black and white, black and black, white and white, and all other people. In this part of the university, look at the progression of the university. It can show you how it's turned into a neoliberal form of social control, where it first started as education and free education. Women didn't come into the university until 30 odd years later. We know that there's a theme and pattern with universities, and we also understand that at this time, there's a strong corporate structure within the university, and that corporate structure embeds systematic racism, systematic misogyny, systematic phobias, homophobia, transphobia within it. And it's very hard to deal with. We did a hierarchy of trying to look at all the different levels, and we found that administration sits at a very high level in the university in control of science, particularly social science.
Mm.
So it's not only us being oppressed, it's disciplines being oppressed as well. Our fight is not only for ourselves, it's also for the humanities, the discipline of humanities. So I don't know if anybody has done conflict resolution here today, has done the subject. I did it as part of my master's. And when I first started doing it, it was so foreign to me. It's hard to go in. It's hard to map that. Here, close your mouth there behind me. And it's traumatic. I think one of the things that we didn't see is this is going to be a fight, and we need the Red Cross too. We need to look after injured people from this, hurt people, particularly people coming into the university with pre-existing trauma, intergenerational trauma from their lived experience, and then the trauma they get from their inability to navigate in the space of an institution, or the trauma that the institution reignites because of the institutions that Indigenous people had prior experience to coming into this institution. Decolonisation is a methodology that is holistic. It's empowering, it's healing, it's fighting, it's loving. It is based on so many emotional aspects of who we are as human beings.
I think that's a lovely way to sort of close and leave with our last kind of action steps moving forward. So we sort of talked through this quite deeply in preparing for this, and we were left with these two outcomes as a way to move forward. And we hope that you take on these suggestions as a part of the process as this conversation has commenced. We think it's really important that these fundamental flaws are addressed at the outset of any process moving forward. Having a memorandum of understanding between the two knowledge systems, which will help then form the basis from which you engage each other. Whatever that looks like, what the model for that is, that has to be unpacked and explored deeper. But it's really important, and I just want to end it on this before we close the space, is that we are honouring and creating nourishing and safe spaces for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to engage in that process and to be a part of that process. It's really important that we take responsibility for the injuries that have been incurred, and that we begin to build processes that really acknowledge and recognise that and think deeply about how to commence from that basis and that baseline. And one of the ways you do that is by creating a safe space. There needs to be a space, in a process in which Indigenous people can have conversations safely to unpack some of the embryonic things that have been explored within different settings. Because like Wilo was saying, we're talking to trauma, and we're talking to intergenerational and multidimensional aspects of that process that transcend the institution and that actually sit outside of even Western knowledge traditions. There are spiritual processes that have to be, and ceremony that has to be entailed and a part of that process to enable the work that is required from an Indigenous centre.
Could I just add to this, Bub?
Yep.
So this memorandum of understanding, there needs to be an action plan, and there needs to be tasks and duties. What I spoke about before about Indigenous people reflecting on this and then discussing this, and non-Indigenous people reflecting on it within the institutional space, that is a task. To reflect on it, to come back. The next one is to bring the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous together to work on this memorandum of understanding so that you clearly capture a Western perspective and an Indigenous perspective that's going to guideline this guidance for a framework, which is another action about how this process continues. The protocols for engagement is a task to set up your guidelines for this. Looking at the Indigenous protocols, we know that our protocols, a lot of our protocols, morals and values come from our kinship engagement. So we already have a system for that. If you parallel that with the Western system in the University of Engagement, then you start to see the dichotomy between the both and start to bridge it. Part of this is also setting up the processes and the tenets of knowledge translation, Indigenous knowledge translation, and Indigenous knowledge transfer. Understanding those fine points and putting them down sets up a framework to move this ahead forward. Cheers.
Thank you for that. Before we close, is there still time to open the floor for questions, Lorraine?
There is, absolutely there is. That's a wonderful, it's not even a platform, it's recreating this space to allow us to join in. So I thank you so much for that. I have lots of thoughts, but I want to, like you do, open it up to everyone else here.
I'll stop sharing this now, eh? Or do you want to leave it up? Then we can see each other.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. And Uncle Wilo, can I say something now? Just a sincere apology. I'm not very good at this, but I cut the beginning of your acknowledgement I didn't have it as a recording. So when you do close, I just wondered if you could just at least reiterate part of that. You did call on the ancestors in the part of the recording, but I missed the very beginning with your acknowledgement and your description of the University of Sydney. So I sincerely apologise for that. You said it to all of us, but it's not part of the recording, part of that. So if you wish to repeat any of that at any point, please do. Okay.
The thing that Kaiya and I did today, the process that we did this, we spoke about this, and I as an elder stood back while Kaiya went through it all. This is the part of Kaiya's growth and a part of my growth into my older years. It's a part of what I've got to do and what Kaiya's got to do. But at the same time, we can still work together in stuff. But that process of the elder and the youth coming up, mentoring, is so very important. We want to model this stuff. The university, as I said before, is on Gadigal land. The land was fig tree forest, and possums were abundant, right down through Glebe and down to the waterfront there. I was talking about how important both of these figures are to any Indigenous person worldwide, and engaging Gadigal people to talk about these things and about how you incorporate them into the university, like a tree of knowledge, the way possum skins are used to record storylines and songlines and family and things that were happening. Victoria Park has a woman's space. They have Yabin there. Who are all the men congregating on that woman's space in Victoria Park? And if there's a man's space there, which I believe there is as well, I've read all of this. Sorry, I haven't gone back to look through my literature, but there's a man's space there too. These spaces need to be reclaimed. And the university students can lead that and start to, comes up from the ancestors that the spaces are safe spaces, reclaimed in the rightful way. Our kids can go down there and a woman's space. We don't expect everybody to abide by those rules and regulations. However, if we do, we model it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, so in moving forward, one of the, and why it was really important for us to sort of start the session by evoking what has gone on historically with the interface between the university and traditional owners of the land on which it stands. I think that is a really significant entry point into the work of mapping what the protocols for engagement might entail. I know that there are small kind of efforts siloed across campus to try and do some of this work, but how that is mirrored within the community is a whole other story. So starting that yarn through acknowledging that space and that country and the knowledge and the autonomy and the authority and the agency of that country is a really important pillar.
Thank you, Kaiya. We're opening up the floor now if anybody else would like to make a comment or engage particularly.
We are all critical scientists here. Say what you want to say. Permission endorsed.
I have to, can I just mention, I'm not going to talk at length, but for me, some of the, well, there's everything you've said is important. And there are a number of aspects that really go, I think, to what I do here. And it's been bothering me for a long time because I teach in Indigenous studies as a non-Indigenous person of Australia. I guess when you talk about trauma and you talk about the environment in which Indigenous students and staff come into, it makes me conscious of what part do I play, even unconsciously, as part of that. But particularly, I think in my teaching, it made sense to me when you talked about being reflective and of roles. And I guess I'm trying to find the borderlines, or trying to find position of myself and the idea about Indigenous knowledges. And I think it's very easy for non-Indigenous people like myself who work in academia to sort of roll over those boundaries. And despite thinking that, and I say we in identifying that group of people as part of, are conscious, but in fact, given the situation of the neoliberal university particularly, we tend to just roll over those boundaries. And I'm very concerned with some of the ways in which I see Indigenous knowledge is imparted, that it's as if it is separate from Indigenous people. It becomes separated for all the kind of respect that we talk about. I could go on at length with that, but so it's really given me some incentive and I think spiritual support to actually think about those issues. And I guess for me, that's a question of ownership about Indigenous knowledges, but more than ownership, that's not necessarily the right word. But I think for me, even when I think about the way that we do these protocols, the level at which it's rhetoric, and the more of us who keep saying acknowledgement, and I wish to say respectfully that I am trying to be respectful and conscious about place in saying that. And I think it has a real value in making myself and other people, other non-Indigenous people, conscious. But I also feel it worries me because I don't see sovereignty restored. I don't see that that's an aim of acknowledgement. And it really worries me that we're all saying all these big rhetorical flourishes and life goes on. And in a way, it's adding insult to injury, you know, because I don't see any radical change coming. It might make people more aware and it sets some people off on a journey, but it's not a radical intervention. Sorry, it worries me that the more I say things that sound good, the less I'm doing.
Let's say this, the reason why they developed Welcome to Country and Acknowledging Country wasn't for this generation. We had to model a process and a ceremony and ritual for the generations to come. It's them who as children grow up doing this. It incorporates it into their way of being, doing and knowing. So one of the things that we have to remain mindful about is that what we're doing now is the beginning of a process that our younger generation will incorporate into their everyday lives. And start to, Aboriginal people are about the future, the past, and the present. When Kaiya's talking about multidimensional, multidirectional, our time is a moment that encapsulates the future, the past, the present, and the moment right now. 4 dimensions, 4 directions it comes from. The north, the south, the east, and the west. And it's all embedded in country. Now, understanding that connection with that, there is a movement about, you've probably all read through anthropology, the soothing of the dying pillow. Soothing the dying pillow. Our culture is dying and it's ready to be dead. Well, if you look across the country, that's not the truth for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. A way of doing things has evolved because of colonisation. However, the very core of it is still there. The philosophy is still embedded there. The connection to country is still embedded there. For Kevin Gilbert to speak about sharing and caring identifies your Indigenous heritage, shows that it evolves. We can't sort of put it into these sort of very boxed in perceptions because they add no context to the perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Uncle Wilo.
Keep open, bub. Stay open.
Thank you.
You'd wanted to say something?
No, I think I should leave it to
No, Jude was
oh,
going
Jude.
to.
Thank you so much for your talks. It's always very enriching. And I'm sorry, I have to, my computer's audio is broken, so I had to use the phone. But I just wanted to say, partly in response to what Lorraine was saying, but also to what you both were talking about in terms of ceremony. With I work in the new museum, and with the building of the new museum, we have been really privileged to be led by how we should start rather than be in the middle of something and try and change it. And for people that I work with, having built into that whole process things like Lynn's fantastic kinship explanation, which involved all of us, people really felt empowered by that to be okay to be here as foreigners, if you like, as settlers, that it was a journey of, oh, that's how that works, that's why that's important. And it really does make an enormous difference to everything that we do, because a lot of us do work with the cultural heritage of others, not of our own heritage, to really get in place before we do things, the thoughts about how we should do things. And it has been wonderful for all of us to be able to call on the university to teach us those things, to be able to work better and more productively here. So we obviously have a very, very, very long way to go, but we have, even in the last 10 years, come so far, and it has been really enriching, I think, for many of us who want to use our ears, and we just need to keep them open. So thank you very much for filling them.
Thanks for that contribution. Uncle Wilo, did you want to say anything?
Go on, Baba, you talk now.
Yeah,
no,
never mind.
I just reiterate what you're saying, Jude. I think the space of museums and archives have, funnily enough, become really transformative and healing spaces for Blackfellas. It's really quite a nourishing place if you can, you know, if you have the right infrastructure in working alongside that. So yeah, I often sort of chime in and see what's going on there, and it's really, you've got good people, and it's really, yeah, it's a really kind of interesting and nourishing kind of exercise if you sort of go in a bit, if you go in deep on that journey. So yeah, I just sort of reiterate what, you know, that's good to hear that that space is evolving in that way.
John, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah. I miss a little bit of the presentation. Sorry, it's very hard to hear when you got a crying newborn. Yeah, look, I loved the presentation as a whole from what I've seen it, but I loved how Uncle Wilo, you spoke about the difference between a socio-centric framework and an egocentric framework or society, and it made me reflect on my years of experience working as a scholarly advocate. And I call myself a scholarly advocate because I hate that word academic. You know, I do research to inform human rights advocacy, primarily for Aboriginal people with disabilities. And I find that when people cooperate like we do, like our mobs do, traditionally, you get more done. It takes a long time, but we do it in our own time. But when the egos get in the way, whether it's from egotistic politicians or executives of universities and so on and so forth, blackfellas, whitefellas end up fighting each other, and it's kind of scuttles the whole debate because the lens and the light ends up focusing on the infighting. I find those two descriptors kind of summarises my experience.
Absolutely. One of our challenges is going to be the intersectionality of Indigenous people. The conservative Indigenous person has a right at the table, as the leftist activist has a right at the table. It's about bringing people together on a position. We all have rights as Indigenous people, no matter what our background is, and no matter what our politics are. And working with a framework that comes to an agreement is very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Before Bubs was born, I had to duck down home very quickly because this whole COVID thing is impacting a lot of our elders' health. Like my mum's blood sugar was 18 when I was down there, and we're there chatting, and I had my godkids and nephews and nieces over just to catch up, have a yarn and a feed, and cleaned out mum's kitchen. But I had an empty bottle of water sitting on the table, and I got a light on my keyring, and I shined the light in the front. I said this bottle symbolises truth, and this is light. Put a light on it. And I turn the light off. Then I turn my light around and shine it on the other side, and the top and the bottom. And I said, and I said, there are multiple truths to one particular event, and that's the story. And it's important for all people's. Oh, I know, I talk too much, Bubba. And it's important for all people to have their voices heard, even if they have different values, experiences, and perspectives. But we want to hear all of that diversity.
Absolutely.
And if we don't, then we are edging towards becoming an egocentric society.
And it goes back to the metaphor that I spoke to about the Indigenous context for conflict and understanding why conflict was given to a community to evolve the development of the broader context of that community's operations. So conflict is a really good thing.
Kaiya, can you just speak on the paradigm of what we talked about? So put it into a bit of an academic science sort of thing now.
Oh, put me on the spot. Well, I guess it's talking about, understanding the really big structural issue that confronts us in working within a space that is not yet post-colonial. And part of the processes of, understanding the role that the higher education sector has served as an instrument to further perpetuate the colonial project, right? So that comes right down through all the disciplines, through all the administration, through all the bureaucracy. It is an iron fist structure. So what we're dealing with is empirical imperialism and understanding the ideologies that we're up against, and how do we actually look to disrupt and dismantle those things. Who is the work of that for, and who actually needs to remove themselves from that process because of the racial injury that occurs. It's exhausting, and it's always not, incumbent upon, people who come face to face with that system all the time to have to continue to put themselves in that context without a process or a protocol that safeguards them. These are some of the things that we hope to be able to unpack together in different ways and through different processes. But we really, there are multiple levels of people here that have their own experience of coming face to face in this system. And there are different levels of experience that can be drawn upon to build the strategy for safe engagement. There is roles and responsibilities and duties and the way in which we can actually build that into a process for governing what actually happens when you go face to face with some of these really kind of big, social processes that aren't just going to kind of come undone.
I'll just add to that. We are moving away from a positivist paradigm that looks at cause and effect and narrowing problems down. We are using two paradigms here because we have to. Constructivist, that the university was looking at embedding Indigenous philosophies. The constructivist paradigm looks at taking those embedded philosophies that are in country and putting them into action, constructing them up into ways of being, doing, and knowing, and a transformative paradigm that transforms the space and the social control that happens within institutions.
Any questions?
I don't know if people have done, I don't know how many social scientists here. So these are very paradigms that are more with anthropology, sociology, and in humanities.
I just wanted to reiterate and say that a lot of what you're talking about is stuff that we've been thinking about and working on when we're doing research anyway. So thank you, because it re-emphasises that I'm probably doing it the right way. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you. Still a long way to go, but yeah, it's very, very useful. Thank you.
Well, we continue to learn in the university, don't we? I think, you know, we fool ourselves if we think we're the experts straight up.
Oh, no.
We are on a continued journey of learning and growing. One of the things that we talked about is that, and, you know, this is going to be in the future, but Kaiya, I hope you don't mind me saying that, you know, we don't have ceremony and ritual that reflects the ritual of initiation, like boys going through manhood. When you come to university, what's his name from Canada, Stephen, who calls researchers ceremony?
Sean Wilson.
Sean Wilson. Where is the ceremony? Where is the ritual? Where is the visible, tangible objects and
regalia?
Yeah, regalia that tells us this Indigenous person has come from one stage of their life at a high school or wherever and come through to this very, very foreign space. It's just like going on initiation, going through country and learning all the song lines and the stories of different ancestors' travels, creation beings' travels, who we are. And then at night time laying down and looking up. When I was a kid, we'd lay down and look up, and how they got us interested was we'd look for satellites first and follow satellites going across the sky. As the satellite passed the story would tell. That's how they got us. They didn't force us, they encouraged us into the stories. And the stories were just so beautiful. Some kids went to sleep, I'd just be so into it because I was a Disney little queen. It was like Disneyland to me. Yeah.
I just also wanted to say, Willow, that we use the possum skin blanket drums out in our country.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, my sister and I actually did a video on it a couple of years ago, but it never went anywhere.
Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. Yeah. And so we went out onto country, and
yes.
It was really funny because my sister and I, the winds were blowing, and then we sat down to sing the song, and we started with pounding the possum skin, and as soon as we started, the winds went right down. Song, she sang it in language, and I just accompanied her, and then as soon as we finished, the winds came back up again. It was like, it was magical.
That's the transformative picture there.
Yeah. It was magical.
Yes. It's real. People, it's real.
I was just thinking when you were talking about ceremony, thinking about the graduations that we have here. And, you know, there's something that we sort of seem to accept, that you have the great hall with all the angels of knowledge down, you know, up, there's the Geometrica, Mathematica. I think most of us probably don't even know much about it, but it's something about it. It's supposed to be awe-inspiring, but it's actually something that I think nobody very much understands about that place. But we use that at the University of Sydney to create a kind of awe, I think, and kind of, you know, majesty about students. And yet it's entirely displaced in terms of what you're saying. And I'm wondering how we can move towards what you are advocating. I think Lynn will have recollection of being at the Kuri Centre. And it links to another point you were talking about, Uncle Wilo, when you said that for Indigenous people being caught up in the bureaucracy. And I think Lynn might want to speak about that and identify with that. But also we lost any kind of structure, you know, that might have been in a kind of central place where Puri Centre could have been somewhere where people were welcomed according to the ways that, you know, to build something out of that. I'm not saying that's the ultimate, but it was something. And then that was taken away. And I don't know, maybe Lynn wants to say something more about those kind of issues, as you were so affected, I think, also in terms of.
Yeah. Oh, I think that some of what Lorraine's alluding to is that whenever we've approached the university following their processes and systems to incorporate culture and traditions, we've been knocked back and we've been told, no, you can't do that. And then a couple of years ago, Lorraine, we had our final graduating group, and I just turned up with all the cloaks and handed them out and said, no, we're using these. And I was able to talk with Deb Hayes, who was giving the address, and she allowed me to do a proper acknowledgement to the students in language. And then the comments were, well, why haven't you done this before? And I said, because whenever I've asked, you've said no. Today I didn't ask, I just did. And I find that really an interesting dichotomy, you know, that they would then say, well, why haven't you done this before? And I said, because whenever I've followed your processes, you wouldn't let us. Today, I've just decided, Aboagye, I'm doing it regardless. And then they've said, oh, you should be doing this all the time. So it's really interesting that, you know, that sometimes we just have to go, all right, let's just do it.
Disrupt
it and do it. And then they actually get the feeling of it, you know, because I know our students at the time, the Aboriginal students that were graduating, said that they felt it more, and that they felt more that our elders were with them that day than at any other time. And that's what it was about.
Absolutely. And when we look at spaces, and you think about a university, my thing about university is that there's a freedom for us to speak how we cannot speak outside of that land. We should be able to speak openly and freely. You know, I have dreams about young Indigenous people studying semiotics and then talking to the white men in their own language about their symbolisms and how they're unfriendly to us. But we are a new mob rising up and being educated. There will be kids that are interested in semiotics and speak that language. We just got to open the space up for them. And we've got to show them that we have a basic knowledge of semiotics as well, that colours are important to us, that certain pathways are important to us, spaces are important to us, what's in those spaces are important to us. They welcome us, they welcome our ancestors, they welcome all of us in. And in this space of knowledge space, it's like walking into a circle of elders. Well, the journey is to attain wisdom for Indigenous people. Initiation is getting further knowledges. Then as you get older, you have another initiation. You go for wisdom, you go for transcendental thing, like on the hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of well-being. But ours is in a hierarchy. Ours is a circle, a continuum. Because some people are born with it. The old souls. Maybe John's baby, there's an old soul.
Yes, we've got a few babies that are old souls.
Yes.
When we were talking about this, I thought about the historically Black universities over in America and the way that they've been able to incorporate Indigenous knowledge as practice into the institution, and how they structure ceremony into the stages of learning, but also incorporated as part of like graduate attributes. They've actually built that into the objective for why people would come to that institution, and they're aligned culturally, which is why they have needed to create their own institution to fight some of that structural issue with the whole empirical kind of imperialism. And you know, needing to justify why you would do something like that and why that process is important, and speaks to a bigger agenda that sits outside of the context of the academy. But, you know, there are models of people that have been doing this and doing it for quite a while. I mean, they're not probably, you know, directly transferable, but there are ways to start to think about what that might look like.
But part of that, Kaiya, is also about how we decolonise ourselves.
Yes.
I know that in our family, like we were doing birthing ceremonies for our children as they were born. And then we suddenly went, some of the nieces and nephews and kids, they're marrying into non-Indigenous families. Properly, we have to actually invite them because it's done by the women. So we have to invite non-Indigenous women because they're now connected by kinship. Oh my God, are they going to make fun of us or see this, make a mockery of what we're doing? And so we just had to take a deep breath and go, well, too bad, we have to do it. And we've actually found the reverse, that they are being engaged in that, and they've actually all said, and we've done about 3 ceremonies now and with non-Indigenous women being there, and they've said they feel so much more connected to the kids and feel so much more involved because of that ceremony they've ever had before. And so, you know, that for us was a revelation that, you know, that they would understand and appreciate. And so now that gives us courage that we can go on and do other things. So I think that's, you know, that's part of our journey as well in the decolonisation process, and it's also because it was drilled into us as a kid, you know, not to speak about language, not to speak about culture because of the policies at the time, and that you might get punished because we'd had so many other people punished. And so that's still part of, even though we're working in a university and in a reasonably senior positions and well accepted and respected, that's always still sitting right there at the back of our head. You know, that we don't feel that we can do something unless we feel that we're being accepted and that it's not going to flip on us and we're going to get punished for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. This goes back to the imperialism, like that disconnection from country and the disconnection from spirituality and that disconnect between mind and body, as though, you know, the pursuit for knowledge is an objective thing, an objective and neutral thing. This is where kind of the fundamental ideology is, you know, disconnected from ceremony and practice, and which is what the competing kind of ideologies are always responding and interfacing between. And, you know, First Nations people are moving in and out of that space all the time and weighing up and figuring out the compromise.
You've given us lots to think about. Thank you.
You too. Thank you for sharing stories.
Can I close it down by letting the ancestors go, please?
Yes, please.
So once again, I'd just like to acknowledge the country you all are on and the traditional owners of that country. And always good to remind ourselves that we are living and walking and being on Aboriginal land. Our ancestors that come today who are standing with us, I'd like to thank you so much, really humbly thank you, fellas, and we look for your guidance in the future. When we have more discussions, fill us with insight, fill us with memories, fill us with examples of how it happened. Lead us to those examples so that we can reignite them and reinvigorate them back into our way of being for our well-being. And thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Lorraine for coordinating, Lynn, and anyone else that's had a part of that process, and thank you for sharing sacred space with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Real
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Biggest thank you to you, Uncle Wilo, for agreeing to do this with me. I really honour and respect that.
Oh, Bob. Yeah, that's going to be a lifetime thing now. I want payback too, you know.
Oh goodness, thank you, Uncle Wilo. Thank you, Kai. You know what? That's been fantastic. I think we could all keep talking, but I understand that. I'm just hoping we can carry this forward now. I think you've given us an agenda to go forward with, and I hope you'll be involved in following talks and maybe coming together at the end of the year, even if it's just in all those positive senses that you said as human beings. And I love that we're not, you know, one of the greatest things I've had is being part of a community of people. You know, like yeah, anyway, I'll leave it. I'm going to go.
Would you like us to do, would you like us to write up a little action plan from those things that we said should happen with the MOU in terms of engagement? Okay.
Would be so beneficial. Thank you so much. And we're very, very grateful. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye, Chris. Bye-bye, Tracy.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Sue, for coming. That's great.
Oh, I just cried all the way through it. Just so brilliant and wonderful.
It's so hard and it's so soft. You know what I mean? It's so acute, but so human. You can. It's not making you choose between being this sort of intellectual or this. It's integrated.
But also, this is what we need. You know, it's so obvious at this time that we need to be working in socio-centric spaces. Just so, you know, I kind of, for a minute, I thought, should I go to the union meeting or should I come to this?
I know.
And then I just sitting here thinking, what the fuck? Why was that even a question? You know?
Yes, I know. I sort of
should have come here.
Well, that's right. I just that was brilliant. I think, you know, I don't know Uncle Wilo from before, but I've heard Kaiya talk about him, and I knew, you know, all the things that Kaiya says and how brilliant she is, but to have her sort of brilliantly led and encapsulated also, it's just fabulous. Yeah. So we're going to do more, and yeah.
So fantastic.
Only about 9. Go on, Sue.
Oh, what's going to happen with the recordings, do you think?
I want to get a website together. I've sort of basically, we haven't, in fact, that was what I was going to say. Do we have enough people here for a committee? But all the people that were in the IRC, a lot of them didn't turn up anyway. So I think I'm going to try and ask somebody who knows how to put up either a website or a Facebook page that we can actually link these to, maybe even a Canvas site, although that makes it sort of very university centric. I'm not sure, but definitely to keep these. That's why I couldn't believe I didn't turn it on right at the beginning.
It didn't matter. I mean, it was so beautiful, the repeated story.
Yes.
And in fact, the story coming then was, you know, just wonderful. Now, I would just really love a copy of the recording myself just to listen again.
Absolutely.
Screaming down my face.
I will send it to you, but and also maybe I'll just write to people and ask them the best way that we think to go forward. Yeah. We were going to perhaps think of other talks from people from the library and what they're doing, because the library is trying to do things to decolonize that space.
Yes, yeah, and the museum too, you know.
Exactly. Well, I've just had two wonderful lectures this week, because as part of the history unit I do, Jude Philp and Matt Poll come in and do a lecture, and then Jane and Eve, who was here a little bit earlier on, who are object, you know, such a fabulous session, and I think we've got a lot to learn. So I'm going to incorporate them also in the education units that we're doing. You know, they're just fabulous. That's really a long-term partnership, and I think it shows what the Koori Centre was able to do before too, in engaging across the university in a way that I don't think, I'm not saying it's not done anywhere else, but I mean with a particular perspective and engagement. And thank you. I mean, Tracy's always here. I wish Tracy was on full-time staff. Just another stalwart of keeps.
Well, it was so good. I really enjoyed it, and it was, gosh, they had so much to say. That was wonderful. Really great.
Didn't they what? It's so meaningful. I found that was yeah. I hope I didn't seem disrespectful in asking that. It just I'm questioning myself about doing all the rhetorically good things, you know.
But what a beautiful answer.
Yeah.
Yes. Inclusive.
It's not about us now and here, or it is, but as well, it's about the future. And
that's right. Yes, I just I talked to him some more about that, and just I just think I've been feeling like a big fake, you know, like that you get into that role of being at university and knowing the right things to say, if you know what, even though I don't really say them all the time, but that there is that. Yeah, I hope it didn't seem disrespectful to say that.
No, that was a good question.
No.
Me, yeah.
I don't think there was any possibility of asking a wrong question. It was just felt such an open.
Yes. Yeah, it was fabulous. They work so well together that I. So there will be a forum for this, and we had some other, what would you say, just points that we might think about as we go along. But I mean, anybody is welcome to make a presentation, or as short or as long as they like, and I'll have maybe 3 more sessions before our final end of year. But I think we could get them back for an end of year.
Back for another,
something. Yes.
Gosh. And you're well, Tracy. Lovely to see you.
Not too bad. Yeah. No. Yes, we're all here at home, aren't we? Kind of going, oh, yes. As you say, which meeting to go to? No, I was going to go to I was going to have the other one somewhere, but then I got, oh, no, don't worry about it. And this was the right one to come to.
Well, I just realised all 3 of us, because I know, are union people.
Yes.
and we're
isn't everyone.
Well, some more than others. Yeah. But
no, this was great. Really, really good. Fantastic.
Excellent.
Okay.
I'll go.
I got 2 hours.
Right. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Fantastic. I really appreciate it.
See you. Bye.